In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful Podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. In the pursuit of purpose, every choice we make holds the power to shape a legacy far beyond our time. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcasts. I'm your host, Sam Pepin, and today we're diving into 3 transformative themes, redefining aging through vitality, the power of living from your spark, and embracing purposeful freedom in retirement. Our guest today is Sharon Rolph, a trailblazing behavioral scientist and the author of Fresh Courage in Retirements. Sharon is passionate about helping people uncover their inner spark to live vibrant, purpose-filled lives. If you're seeking a richer connection with yourself and others, Sharon's insight will inspire you to create a legacy of joy and contribution. If you enjoyed the discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Miss Sharon Rolph, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good. We've had our rain so far, and it's now sunshine. So let's shine with our podcast here a little bit, okay?
Absolutely. Sounds like a plan. It's my first time meeting you, and you seem like a wealth of wisdom and energy, which is beautiful to see. To kick us off, please tell us more about effortless vitality.
Well, effortless vitality was a term that actually came across in my coaching manual. When I first retired, I started coaching class the week before I walked out of the door at Boeing after 8 years. And I love the term because, when you're in the flow of doing your best work, you lose track of time, and that flow is kind of a beautiful thing. And it really ties to my secret sauce now, because the first thing they taught us that first weekend was to define our intrinsic motivation. They call it effortless vitality. No. They called it an essence statement. Yeah, essence statement. And when I first shared my essence statement with the class, I had noticed that as we were standing in a circle and it was coming around the circle to my turn, I noticed these guys are kind of moved, kind of sniffling a little bit as they read their statement. And when it came my turn, I thought, nobody's ever asked me to define my soul. So as I've been going through classes, and a couple of people have told me I had a spark and I should have an economic impact with using the word spark. So now I call the essence statement your spark or inner spark. And it's all the good things that are inside, our invisible assets. So I want to talk about that more today if you'd like.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting because embracing your inner spark is something you talk a lot about, but I'm wondering, you had a very, very extensive, obviously, corporate career, for about basically how long have you been in corporate, by the way, prior to retirements and everything you're doing?
Well, I'd say it was over 40 years. I put in 19 years at GTE, the phone company, and both here in Washington State and in Tampa, Florida. And I worked 3 years at the post office, hefting those trays and delivering mails. Hey, I grew up on a farm, so it wasn't as hard for me as it would be other people. And but my job at GTE was pretty much a office job, and I was a good worker, and I figured people would move me, my supervisors would move me along as they saw my growth, whatever. Well, it took a little while for me to realize that, oh yeah, I gotta go pursue my growth more than what my supervisor will pay attention to. So I was diligent. I was responsible. I want you to take my words to the bank. So, and yet I felt invisible. I felt way down at the bottom of my stomach, and I did want to be invisible as a kid growing up. There had been abuse in our home, and I thought, if I buckle down, keep my head focused and get good grades and be obedient, that maybe I'd be safe. And for the most part, I was. I was a lifelong learner. Oh, yeah, you might want to know I skipped second grade, though. My mom had me test my brother and sister on the flashcards, 2 plus 3 equals 5 kind of thing. And by the time I started first grade, I practically knew my sister's math cards better than she did. So I got a chance to stay after school in first grade and read second grade books to the teacher while she graded papers. And I've always been glad I was ahead of those kids behind me. I was more mature. Thank goodness I'm not in that class.
It's interesting. It's interesting because tell me more about some of what it is to find purpose in retirement after such a lengthy corporate basically career. What are some of perhaps the lessons you took during your corporate life in order to have a meaningful retirement?
Well, I have to admit that I did take initiative in my career to be a part of Toastmasters and to take a Dale Carnegie course. And I noticed at Boeing, when I used initiative at work, it often paid off very nicely. So that is a lesson I would give people in their careers about if your boss isn't noticing your initiative you're taking, then mention it to people who might appreciate it. Other bosses who you could work for, and they would be appreciative of your showing initiative. So, like at Boeing, I was doing I was called a provisioner, and I would take carts out to the airplanes that needed to be installed, and then I'd bring those carts back. And as I'm walking around the production floor, I noticed whenever people put boxes in the dumpster, they take up so much room if they're big. So I thought, why don't I break these boxes down so you can get more in the dumpster? A little stuff like that. I started noticing, because I pay attention, that there was a real science behind box design, and there came a time when people were kind of up in arms about there's so much glue involved in packaging, and that hot button for somebody has actually made a big difference in the design of boxes. So I still, even here at home, I break down boxes because you get more in the dumpster,
Those are small lessons, but they're still very valuable. And I love what you're saying. And one of my favorite saying actually is from George Eliot, which is it's never too late to be what you might have been. And when you're thinking about some of the lessons also from your book, which is Fresh Courage in Retirement, you truly own in on courage a lot. Why courage? Why is that so meaningful?
Well, I don't know exactly why. I had to ask around a lot of people. Who do you know who could be on my podcast to talk about courage? I was shocked at nobody knowing somebody that could do that. There's a problem here. So the guy and I don't remember how I connected with him, but I actually ran into him last week again. He's now 91, and he's got a PhD in theology, and I don't know several other things like he has been a guide on railroad events. Tell people about the area, but he's also been started some of the first senior center communities, bring people together to talk. I mean, he's been a soccer coach, umpire, I guess, for like over 20 years, and it goes on and on with all the things he's done. And so I realized after having Dr. Bob on my podcast that there's a lot of kind of spiritual elements about courage and resilience and hopefulness. And he was so full of both curiosity is another good thing about courage. So that was, a podcast full of information. And it wasn't long after that I was given a chance to be a speaker on somebody else's, I guess it was more of a class than a podcast. There was a gentleman teaching people in Brazil to speak English. And he didn't care what I talked about. They just wanted to hear English. What a deal. So I talked to them about retirement, and I probably mentioned courage in there some, but they asked me back. I had been one of their most popular favorite speakers. So the second time I did talk about courage quite a bit. And so I had filled out one of these forms that say, courage to be, courage to have, and courage to do. And no wonder that was, fascinating, because it had a lot of meat to it. So then shortly after that, I was taking a pitch class, pitch your, what you do. And so the leader had started asking, like, what are you known for? Your neighbors or people around you, who knows you as the best whatever. And the first gal had said, well, people know me as a dog person. She loved dogs. And so when it came my time, I decided, so she got the queen of dogs, kind of thing. So when it was my turn, I decided, well, I'm the queen of courage then. And so I've used that quite a bit as both encouragement. And I started holding out my art blocks that I made. I love to sew, I love color, and I love words of wisdom. So this block says, worry is a misuse of imagination. One of my favorites, in fact. So I started holding this up on Instagram and telling people why this matters to me. What is the lesson you could learn? And I must have made, 50, 60, 70 Instagram posts just starting with that. So, and since then I keep we all need encouragement. There's so many things coming at us and knocking us around and discouraging us. Well, who's encouraging you? We all need to lift each other's up and to inspire each other, because it's so important, and that's what I love to do.
And I love the Queen of Courage is one thing that I dive deeper into, because, well, first of all, it's quite catchy. I like it, but it's also about, I think the bulk of your philosophy, from my understanding, is about living courageously, and I suppose inspiring others to also take bold actions at any stage of their life. And when you're thinking about your definition of courage and that little story about that how that involves you as the queen of courage, how can people perhaps take some insights into your story to perhaps discover their own?
Well, it's all on Instagram. No, I still am. I feel invisible still in my family. Even though I've written my book and put my art blocks in the middle of throughout my book, nobody has ever said a word about my book. I have two younger sisters that are still alive. My older brother and sister have passed on. But so that kind of hurts a little bit, that they're not at least patting me on the back or how's it coming along or whatever. So I need fresh courage myself every day. Oh, by the way, fresh courage came from a Hallmark movie. And the line was, when you go home from vacation, you often go home with fresh courage. Yeah, I'd figured that out. I had more gumption and more backbone when I got back from, there's been things not getting done or needs to be changed, and I now have the backbone to help it change, So I being a lifelong learner, I was the only one, and my youngest sister has been pretty prolific in reading, so that's helped her grow. But a lifelong learner has helped me a great deal in life to get ahead and encourage myself with books. And in fact, books have been probably more of a friend to me than the world. I'm pretty much of an introvert, but the learning from and besides, books don't hurt, having been through this abusive home. They say either people become promiscuous or they become overweight, so that I don't have to deal with come-ons and advances. And yes, my older sister tended to be promiscuous, and I've lost about 60 pounds since I retired. So, but learning to love myself and one of the principles that helped me a lot with getting those critical voices out of my head was to say, I'm doing the best I know how. And when I started applying that to me, and I gave myself a 70th birthday party. I'm 77 now, but I remember going back and pulling out some pictures of me in my younger 20s, 30s, 40s. I didn't look that heavy, but of course we're always comparing ourselves to each other, and that comparison can basically kill you, stop you, not feel good about ourselves, I don't measure up. And yet when you tell yourself you're doing the best you know how, there's a freedom that comes that, yeah, I am. Yeah, my parents were doing the best they knew how. And getting rid of that judgment and comparison will make you feel lighter, I think. I'm glad you talk about the book, because that's something that I want to explore with you, if it's possible. When you're thinking about some of the actionable steps and strategies from your book and just your experience in general that can help other retirees to rediscover fulfillment and joy in these new chapters of life, what are some of their best tips? Well, one of my guests on my podcast said, in fact, she was a surprise because I expected I was going to be interviewing her husband, and here she came on the line, and I didn't even know who she was, and here she had started a foundation. But my topic that day was, in fact, about encouraging seniors in retirement to consider starting a foundation. Well, she gave a tidbit that I've used a lot, and that was she had gone through a nasty divorce, hurt her a lot. And one of her friends said, well, Cynthia, what is it that you could do that would be so fulfilling and meaningful that it would overshadow the pain of your divorce? And at the time, this guy had a project going to build small homes in Tibet for basically homeless people. And so she considered, well, would one house be enough to overshadow that pain? No, I don't think that's going to do it. Would 10 houses? Well, it might start. And she wound up building 100 houses, a big project that she could really get focused in on, and that helped her heal her heart. Well, her tip for retirees was, if you're an accountant when you retire, find somebody as a foundation or a charity that needs accounting done. And that's a nice, smooth transition without putting a whole lot of time and frustration into finding something new to do. And if you're a pilot, find some organization that needs people or things delivered somewhere. So do what you did for charity is a nice, easy to handle transition for retirees. But I also wrote a course this last May on volunteering. And I got remembering about how I think I was 14 years old when Mom suggested I do something for somebody else, and I don't remember what it was, but she made the point that when you do for others or bless others, you often get blessed too. There's a reciprocity that happens. And so I do a little bit of preaching in my book about volunteering, because there's so many lessons involved in doing for others. So in my book, I have a chapter on volunteering. I interviewed a AARP past president for Washington State, and he had a nice layout of 9 tips that you get from volunteering. You're like, try it out. So I used his comments, and then I enlarged on it from my perspective and my stories. And he said that you become more social when you're volunteering. So you're meeting people. He talked about having met his dentist while he was volunteering, and come to find out his dentist had biked around the world in many countries. You don't learn that from your dentist when you're in the dentist chair. What a surprise. He got to learn new things. He learned how to be a wood plant specialist at the University of Washington Arboretum. Well, that Arboretum is quite large. I bet he had a lot to learn. But he enjoyed it. I think this fella also had been spent some years in Japan and learned the Japanese language somewhat. And I believe his wife was Japanese also. Well, there's a beautiful Japanese garden in amongst the Arboretum. So, and the last tip he gave was about how meaningful it was that he helped change somebody's life. And his story was that he had took up some classes about being an advocate for seniors, and would sometimes go around to assisted living places checking to see that people's needs were being met. And he found this lady that never ate in the dining area. So dining area is a huge social activity, right? But she didn't have any teeth. And she felt embarrassed about that. And nobody had solved the problem of her getting some dentures. And this gentleman was able to change her life by simply doing something for her she couldn't do for herself, and get some dentures to have so she could eat in the dining room. So I'm proud of my course that I wrote, Make a Marvelous Transition into Volunteering, and that can be a huge part of your retirement social and psychological life. And as when I got finished writing it and recording the lessons, I got such a strong feeling for a couple of days that it would change people's lives, and that's bring out the best of them. That's why I'm here.
And empowering retirees to make meaningful contribution is something you talk very much at length about, which is so beautiful. You mentioned obviously charities, you mentioned volunteerings. Why do you think that urge of giving back is so important for you? Where does that comes from in your personality?
Well, Sam, would you rather be depressed? Would you rather be sad? Would you rather be invisible? You know, we aren't taught that when you're retired, you're the boss now. You have to set your schedule. You have to keep your doctor's appointments, your teeth and your eyes and your ears and stuff like that. And you're no longer getting paid for your muscle or your brain. You've got time to live from your heart. Who tells us that? Yes, you might live from your heart when you're walking your dog or playing with your dog. That feels really good. But do you do that over your retirement years? I intend to live another 25 years. So I'm not going to be, you can go through 2 or 3 dogs by that amount of time. But the having purpose, the huge topic of purpose, helps you be more productive, helps you be healthier and therefore live longer, longevity, and it gives you a meaning to get out of bed, and that meaning is so powerful. I kind of sometimes equate it to feeling a little bit like heaven on earth. You're needed, you matter, you fit in somewhere, and you're doing it from your heart. Wow!
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And it's very interesting because I think a lot of our purpose is built on being useful or actually thinking you are useful and in somewhat or some shape or form, even if it's quite minor, which seems quite minor, benefiting the world through your presence. And I think those are definitely words of wisdom. And I was wondering something about your work because it was very insightful to me. But you talk quite a bit about behavioral science and how that plays into retirement coaching and how important that can be perhaps to basically leverage your expertise to make sure, because you are a behavioral scientist, which is also quite interesting. How does that impact your work in helping retirees basically maybe overcome some challenges they might have from their work or any other hiccups they might have in their lives?
Well, I think maybe I understand people a little better than some. I know when I first got my degree, some of the classmates were saying, well, there's no ads in the paper for behavioral scientists. It was still kind of a new field. And they said, well, find jobs in human resources. And there were a lot of jobs that kind of came close, but never was there one that, I want that job. It can never happen. But I consider myself, Sam, a facilitator. So I facilitate everybody else's or people around me, facilitate their success. I often was asked to help people with their resume. And, sometimes we're too close to our own skin to be objective. Not everybody can do that? Well, no, you're the only one that among your friends that can do certain things. And so you help people include on their resume some of those things that we take for granted, right? And so that's an example of how I help people be their best. And at Boeing, I was helping crews take the problem solving down to the lowest level, and because they're usually the best ones to solve things. And every now and then I'd get the comment from people, "You got the hardest job in Boeing." But I enjoyed it because that encouragement and that inspiring people to give their best was just something that came naturally to me. I had somebody recently ask me, how did I feel when I speak? Nobody had ever asked that before. And I was kind of surprised at my answer, because I said, it just feels like I'm doing my job. So, yeah, when you talk about learning what your invisible assets are, it's and then purposefully be driven by what your uniqueness is, it just feels like you're doing your job.
Yes, and one thing that is an observation of mine, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is in America at least, and actually in the world in general, but in America, retirement is getting pushed further and farther down basically the person's lives. It's no longer freedom 55, as we like to say in Canada. That's what will be basically behind us. So for the most part, it's 62, 65, even 70 now, which is quite, there's a couple of things that are alarming, but that's not where I'm going. Where I'm going with this is, as we're expecting our careers to be longer and longer, how do you define retirements? What's retirements in the first place? Is it just the act of not having basically a formal job or a corporate job? Is it a state of mind? Is it perhaps the freedom that you get from that free time? Tell me more about how do you define retirements in the first place?
Well, that can be all over the place. Because I look so young, I don't feel like I've ever been disqualified from anything, but because of age. So that is a blessing that is pretty rare. But I see retirement, Sam, as all this time freedom being untapped potential. You could be doing something productive with your potential of time freedom in retirement. And that is so huge that, and my understanding is that 67% of the retirees struggle with finding purpose in retirement. Now, you might have felt a huge amount of purpose in your job, in your career, but it may change in retirement with all this free time. I'll never forget my Edward Jones lady. I was in her office one day, and she had been working with another single gal, and she said the gal had only been retired 2 weeks, and she died. Well, without a purpose, I can understand. In fact, somebody told me at Boeing there was a gal that I think worked into her 80s or so, and there was a myth going around Boeing that said, "Oh yeah, there's lots of people that put off retiring because they know they'll be dead in 3 years." Oh, that hurt my heart. That doesn't have to be. And yet, what you believe, it's just like people asking me about being discriminated against about my age. What you believe is what stops you. I decide what stops me, and you can too. There's so much good that you could be doing with mentoring other people, or volunteering like we've already talked about, or writing books, or teaching others how to paint or sing or dance or whatever. You can decide what stops you. You know, all those people trying to give you advice about you're too old. I was told I couldn't get into bowling after 50. I walked in the door anyway at 60. I decide what stops me.
Beautiful, and it's such a clever observation on your side, because I see it myself, and I'm obviously a much younger gentleman, but I see it in my family members and some of my colleagues. Most people that we serve business wise are much older than I am, which is quite interesting. But there's definitely a very interesting part of life, which is this transition between whatever jobs or what you consider your job into what we consider retirements, modern retirements, and that sparks that unfortunately just completely fades out. Like you said, you were just mentioning about this lady, dying shortly after retiring. I saw that very often. It seems like, again, the reason why they were on this earth is just completely evaporating, because now somehow they don't have a job, and that is there's a lot of sadness about that. I think there's also some major meaningful points that we might be insights we might be able to take from it. Don't you think that if your purpose, yes, it can be a part of your job, but in the understanding in which one day you won't have that job because of retirements, would it be clever to actually, during your time at your job, thinking about purpose outside of it, thinking as purpose maybe that is bigger than yourself, or somehow basically kind of like preparing yourself for that time in which, again, you won't have a job and you'll need other things to rely on for a meaningful and purposeful living. Can you share any tips on how to do such thing?
Well, yeah, there's two things that come to mind. The first one is most obvious, is that yes, your abilities, your strength, your balance, your hearing, your eyesight, they all change, diminish, and we do have to make room for those adjustments, and those adjustments can be difficult. I have a friend that has reconnected with me that I knew in my teenage years, and his wife has been passed away now about 2.5 years, and that whole adjustment that life is different now takes courage, But let's see, what was the other thing I was going to say? Well, it'll come to me in a minute. So you're just because you're not as capable. Well, we often are wiser in our older years, right? And I think I have a whole lot more confidence than I used to. Okay, when I first retired, I think it was like only a month or two into my retirement, I got something in the mail that said I was an influencer. I think you've made a mistake. This can't be true. How do you figure this out, And I just ignored it because I had no sense of being an influencer then. But I don't know, a few weeks later, I got this call from New York City saying that they thought I might have something interesting to say, and that people would like to listen to you and all this. And I did a recording with them. Of course, it cost me some money. But then they came back. It wasn't until maybe 3-4 hours when Sharon, we see that you had a lot of energy. You were interesting and had some vitality to you, and would you like to do your own podcast? So I did 25 audio only with them, and then I took a little break and came back with some ladies here in town to do the audio and video, and I've grown into being an influencer and recognizing that and embracing it. And there's a lot of new things we may grow into because we're either reviving a dream or a talent that we used to have. We're trying something new. How about learning a new language? That's a little bit of a stretch. Maybe, okay, so actually, I have something I created called What Makes Your Heart Sing. And I was actually in a plane coming back from Phoenix, and I wrote down 48 ideas of things that might make your heart sing. Like something as preposterous as singing to people in the prison, teaching kids what your talent and skill is, or touching the water in the 7 oceans. And I've actually heard a story of somebody who followed the monarch butterfly migration from Mexico. As big or as small as can fit in your heart, maybe decorating or planting, being in charge of a roundabout, keeping it pretty and attractive. If it makes your heart sing, it's worth doing and enjoy doing at the same time. Because joy to me is a little bit of feeling heaven on earth.
Yes, and it's so you get a little bit emotional here, which I think is quite beautiful, and it's very clear that you are very passionate about basically getting the words out there, and I was wondering, when you got that call, and you were very surprised about basically them telling you that you were an influencer, but how do you feel with the acknowledgments that what you're doing impact others and are actually flourishing beautiful things? And how does that make you feel personally?
Well, I have collected these words of wisdom for probably about 20 years. It's not uncommon at all whenever I read a new book that I write down some notes and say, will this be short enough to fit on a block? Let's see, I've got some more here. This is one I gleaned from a conference. Never underestimate the power of a planted seed. And that has been a stake in the ground for me, because seeds, we sometimes have no idea how enormously important they are. And, our food chain has been altered because of seeds being altered. And I'm not surprised at all that our quality of food has also been impacted. Okay, so this is one of my favorite too. When you see what you're here for, you suddenly find yourself on stage written in a play expressly for you. And that's by B.S. Flowers. Have you ever heard of actors being interviewed and they felt like the role they played fit them like a glove? It was such a powerful experience for them. And I declare, when you know yourself better on the inside, that can be your story too. And to feel that warm glow of expressing yourself in your favorite way.
It will, and to me, what's most impressive about yourself is just the sheer living with essence, living with vitality as well, which I think is very key. And you mentioned quite a bit. When you're thinking about the concepts of and the essence perhaps of vitality and in this quest of finding your true self and perhaps to achieve lasting happiness, how are you able to cultivate a lifestyle in which gave you so much energy, so much vitality, even quite as a seasoned 73 years old, if I'm not mistaken, you said? How is that? What's some of your best tips to keep being energized, keep being vitalized, and perhaps keep feeling so healthy even when other people are not?
Well, I'm not doing the greatest job, Sam, on taking time out for joy and on a weekly basis. There's an ocean down here just a mile away, and I can probably count on a couple hands how often I go down there and put my feet in the sand. And yet, while you're there, you see the seals and you see the ferry boats and the seagulls. And sometimes, I don't think I've seen them, but there's whales down there. There's eagles, and there's even a dog park. Well, I do get my cheers from feeding dogs biscuits on my walk every day. I did a walk today, and I found one dog to give a biscuit to. Sometimes I leave biscuits on people's mailbox because I know they have a dog. But hey, the crows come along and steal them sometimes too. So that's one way of having daily joy in my walk. In fact, I'll never forget one day that I was not feeling up to par quite, the best. And should I go on my walk or should I not? And yeah, let's go for it. It's a habit. And on that walk, I think I talked to a couple of neighbors, and what a surprise when I came home feeling so much better. Yeah, let's not let your physical condition in a day. Actually, the walk might help you feel better because that self-care is, I even heard that just patting yourself, your skin is therapeutic. How great is that? I took a cruise in September. It was a big leap of faith, and I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. But I came back and said, it's a test. It's just a test. But a couple of days later, I actually felt sad all day long. And I got a sense that maybe that was a breakthrough of walking into a new level, status, transformation that was in fact marking a stop of some kind and moving up to a new level. And tests will often do that for us.
I love what I think it is Albert Einstein actually that said, do not grow old, no matter how long you live. Never cease to stand like curious children before the great mystery in which we were born. And to me, it's very impactful because when I look at some of the joyful people in my life, and when I look at my grandparents, I look at my great-great-parents actually, which mine actually sadly passed away in 2 years ago. But it's very interesting to see just how much perspective plays a role in how you carry yourself in those, let's say long, basically older age, and when you're thinking about again this concept of redefining aging, which I think is what you're doing now, and perhaps living vibrantly, even in your 70s and beyond, and as long as you perhaps can share the world with all these beautiful people. One thing that was very interesting to me, and we did not truly cover it in this podcast yet, is I understand the meaning of yours, which is, well, why not, if instead of being depressed or sad, why not just being joyful and trying to propose a great mission forward? But at the art of that mission, what is basically the legacy you're trying to leave behind you with such powerful courses, books? Tell me more about that big why.
Oh, you not piddle around with small questions. You will ask the big questions. I intend to impact 10% of the boomers to live from their spark. Life is so much better, happier. Your health is better. You could spend time volunteering instead of at the doctor's office. I have never had cancer, diabetes. I did get cataracts and had them taken care of. I'm in need of some hearing aids, but being that feeling of destiny and feeling useful is huge. Now maybe your destiny is painting pictures, painting for around our town. We have several that hold murals on the side of buildings. One is of the whales, and one is of the water and the ocean and the sprays of water and all that. There are so many. Well, okay, I have to admit, I love beauty. And to me, my blocks are expression of beauty. And because of that, I also love flowers. Well, you have to plant flowers over and over and over again, but the fragileness of a flower and the color and the beauty, I have gained a lot of appreciation the last 2-3 years of how abundant things around us are growing. There's lots of hedges and lawns and trees and it's all free. And our gift, a lot of them are free. Yes, sometimes we have to focus on them to make them better. But so I want boomers to change the world with their talents, with their giftings, with their dreams. Oftentimes we complain about things, and you might be the one to improve it. I think every now and then I used to drive down to South Seattle for work the last couple of years, and one time there was a new traffic signal sign or something on the freeway, and that's better. That's improving things. How come it's all of a sudden now something new that it needed to be improved? And thank goodness somebody did. So another story example from my book was a guy that was a civil engineer, and when he retired, he kept doing civil engineering kinds of things around town because he liked it. For example, when I'll never forget my grandpa seeing him cross a traffic signal across a street. It took 3 times for the light to change, and he was still in the street. You wonder who's going to hit him, Well, this fella had added to the traffic signal lights an option to ask for more time to get across the street. He made a list of what buildings had elevators in them. If you were in a wheelchair and you needed an attorney, how do you find an attorney on the 32nd floor when you were in a wheelchair if there isn't an elevator? So all kinds of real common things like that somebody saw a need and addressed it. So when you're living from what came naturally to you, I sometimes refer to it now as our DNA. Maybe it's even our GPS. And no doubt, I have no doubt at all that you will feel a little bit of heaven on earth.
It's interesting because 3 years ago when I started my business back in 2021, my partner of mine sat me down. And he saw that I was very anxious. Obviously, was taking on the new challenge, and it's quite beautiful, but it's quite stressful. And he said, "Sam, people always think the grass is green on the other side, but the truth is the grass is only green when you water it." And it was interesting because that gave me a better perspective around how can I embrace my positive emotions to actually better the world and not just let me denigrate myself with some of the pain or the fear that I had because of this new challenge that I was taking on. And I don't think so. Everybody has those negative emotions. And what I always tell people is do not suppress them, because there's great insights in what you feel, what you're trying to avoid. You can get actually humongous lessons and very, very precious lessons into understanding why that is. Same thing when you're actually winning. When you're actually winning, you should pause and ask yourself, hey, not only why did I win, but how do I feel when I win? How does that make me perhaps proud or happy or whatever emotions you have? And one thing you mentioned, which I want to dive deeper in, is nature, right? You talk about flowers, you talk about taking care of around the river. When you're thinking about what it means to have a meaningful life, do you believe that spending more times in nature will be something that gives people not only the freedom of mind and perhaps being more grounded to what a beautiful world we have, but maybe one of the few key activities they should do on a regular basis to re-energize, revigorate perhaps themselves? How important do you think nature plays a part in that process?
Yeah, well, let me tell you a story like yours. I was coming back from a long weekend, and the first thing I did was come out here to my patio and water my flowers. And as I was approaching my condo flowers here, oh yeah, if they're not growing, they're dying. And that correlated with me about, if you're a couch potato, it may take you 3 years to die because you're not growing, So there's actually, I came back from, I guess I was out camping up near Mount Baker, and the next day when I got back, I had an eye exam of some kind, and the gal mentioned to me that she said in Japan, they actually have, doctors will write a prescription for you to get forest time. I had never heard of that before. And there is, in fact, not even a mile away from me, a small collection of trees that the University of Washington has protected, I guess, and they study the trees. And in fact, I remember, this has been probably 10, 12 years ago now, that a pastor had mentioned how that the roots of trees actually water each other. That there's not, so you're not getting water. Sorry for you, you're on your own. No, the roots will share nutrition and water for each other. And so see, I'm trying to get back to your question though. Spending time in nature. The elegance of the freedom of flying, or I on my walk, I also whistle a lot at the crows. I like to think there's a family of crows that know me well, even when I step outside my condo or the patio here, I'll whistle at the seagulls or the crows. I had a friend at Boeing that would set out some crumbs from bread on a fence, and his coworkers thought he was crazy, but they knew when it got to be 10 o'clock, Bob was going to be putting the bread out for them. There's no past or future with babies and with animals and flowers. It's always a present moment. And we're so consumed with what happened, or what will happen. Yes, I've been a little bit anxious lately with some decisions I'm making, but I'll never forget stomping my foot and saying, I refuse to live my life based on fear. There's actually a book that says a lot about that hardly anybody has ever heard of, but it was a book that in fact was locked away for 70 years. And it was written by Napoleon Hill, just 2-3 years after he wrote Think and Grow Rich, which I read at a very young age, and it's called Outwitting the Devil. It was locked away because of his own fear of being, I guess, laughed at, criticized, ridiculed. So you're familiar with that book, huh?
Oh yes, I know that book very well. Actually, Napoleon Hill is my one of my favorite author of all time. Think and Grow Rich is the first book that I read when I was 13 years old, and it is an incredible, obviously extraordinary book. And I actually try to read it every single year now because it's that good. And to me, it's on part with some of Ralph Waldo Emerson's work and all these great thinkers, I think, set the foundation for modern philosophy. Jim Rohn as well, which is the Seasons of Life, which is one of my favorites of all time. And it's very important. I think we ought to look at our past to get insights and wisdom when it comes to timeless lessons that they shared with us. And there are many, there are plenty. And one thing that I always love to look at, and that's why I think I have the utmost respect for seasoned people in all realms of life, is through sophistications, typically human beings think you're getting better. We're evolving. We don't need you anymore, right? You did your time. Now you just go enjoy around on the beach. And nothing wrong if you want to enjoy on the beach. But if you don't, and perhaps you want to leave a lasting legacy, you have something, there's a fire basically in you that you still think you need to propulse forwards, well, you should do it. There's no age to do that. Age is a number, like Mr. The Rock Johnson said. And I think that this mentality of perhaps legacy is one of the core foundational concepts of my life that I always live my life with the intention of saying, how does that contribute to something that can be leveraged in 300 years from now? It's okay to think about tomorrow, next week, but what about many decades, many centuries in the future? And so it's always quite important. And actually, I love what you said about being yourself, and you talk a lot about the true you, which you're gonna dive deeper into it in a second. But Ralph Waldo Emerson actually said, to be yourself in a world in which they're always trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. And it is absolutely true, because what I tend to see is now with technology, with again, everything that we consider evolution and innovations, people are actually starting more and more to fade into oblivions, into invisible states like you were talking about. And 99% of people actually are very, very rarely heard, even though in a world where communication is as free and as potent as we live, which I think there's again some insight to get from that. I think way too many people with way too few things to say talk too much, and way too many people with a lot of things to say don't talk. They don't have a voice basically to be able to again propose their message in this world. And Sharon, when you're thinking about some of the guidance on aligning your daily life with personal values and passion, perhaps to create a meaningful retirement, can you dive a little bit deeper into, do you use any framework? Do you think it's something that is different per individuals? What are some of basically the rules of thumbs you want to keep in mind for meaningful retirement?
Well, I am so delighted. The people who are like Jim Rohn and lots of other people like Napoleon Hill, there often is a spiritual element to their life that helps them be courageous and unique, that is starting to be embraced again. And there has been a lot of wisdom that we used to get in church that's not getting shared. That's why I put some of it into my volunteering course. Lessons like reciprocity. When you do for others, it often comes back to you. And it's free, or people open doors for you or whatever. So there's a spiritual element when you think about possibilities. Okay, so the front of my book is Explore the Possibilities. That also has an element of hope. Hope is definitely a spiritual word. Love is a strong spiritual word. Courage, of course. Potential. I think when I was 14 and wondered what my potential was, that's looking for the mystery inside of me. In fact, I think I want to maybe start talking a little bit more in the future about. I put a list of how the word mystery is used in the Bible, and I think a lot of times we're not understanding it maybe the way it was meant. And one of my favorite verses is nothing is impossible. Now, my sister reminds me, it says, with God, nothing is impossible, but still, nothing is impossible. And I guess I kind of feel like everybody has a little bit of God inside of them, and they have a sense of, what's the word, character or reputation so I always am looking for possibilities, but to get back to realizing that I'm hungry for spiritual elements in my life is a very good thing. It helps us to be stronger and more confident. Every day before I get out of bed, I ask, what do I need to know today? And how do you want to dance with me today, God? So to me, that dancing with me, God, is opening the door for something miraculous or out of the ordinary, or the Holy Spirit to be a part of my day and delight me, because I think a lot of delight is involved with the Holy Spirit. I've enjoyed the book The Shack. Now, at the time it was written, it's by Paul H. Paul Young. There's an initial ahead of it, but it's written as a novel. But I've been on his website a couple of times, and there's a lady that said, how you wrote that story is exactly what happened to me and my daughter. So I think messages come to me just like Napoleon Hill, and outwitting the devil is a little bit one of those things on the edge. You don't know whether to believe it or not, but I believe it's possible that it happened. And so where am I going with this? Yeah, I forgot where I was going with this. But to embrace curiosity. A 3-year-old keeps working at opening your cabinet and playing with those kettles or reaching that doorknob, and they keep working at it until it's possible for them. And if we looked at retirement as what's possible in retirement, I'm curious. Let's stretch it a little bit and embrace that that Holy Spirit, that possibility, that what insight could happen. Okay, so here's one that I did just a couple weeks ago. I've been doing a loneliness to resilience community weekly on Wednesdays, and I had since I set the agenda and bring guests in or whatever, or do the research, a thought popped in my mind. I wonder what connection there is with authenticity and resilience. I was shocked what I found. There's a lot of correlation between being authentic and resilience, because authenticity basically is being genuine. Sam is authentic and genuine on his podcasts. That's why people listen to him. He's got the wisdom. If you're not, okay, so one of my friends, this friend that is new to our group, he's shared how he gets frustrated when you go to church and around all these people. How are you? Oh, I'm fine. How are you? Oh, I'm fine. You're expecting, oh, I'm fine. And it's not the truth. It's not his truth. So I kind of tried to give some insight to the fact of being vulnerable. And one of my little blocks is about vulnerability, the courage to be seen, show up and be seen without any guarantee of the outcome. Oh yeah, here it is. And that takes courage, the willingness to show up and be seen without any guarantee of the outcome. I think that's kind of like inviting a miracle to happen. I don't know how you're going to respond to my blurting something out that doesn't seem to be related. And yet it might touch your heart. Oh, and she lived to tell about that, and she was vulnerable and it didn't kill her. Now you can relate to me in a totally different way or totally different level.
Absolutely. Perhaps what goes around comes around is my business partner favorite saying. I think truly, I suppose, summarize some of your thoughts. Sharon, Rolph, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the Meaningful Podcast today. And I was truly wondering if you could share some last words of wisdom with our audience, please.
Yeah, my favorite thing to share is from Thomas Wolfe. I found it on a wall at work at GTE years ago, and it said, if one has a talent and fails to use it, one has failed. If one has a talent and partially uses it, one has partially failed. If one has a talent and finds somehow to use the whole of it, they have gloriously succeeded and found a satisfaction few people ever know.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.